I made a reading list document to help people learn philosophy. So, if you're interested in reading, learning, and better educating yourself, then it can help you decide where to start and give you some guidance on what to do. And I'm going to present some of the information in it to help you understand the document. So, why read philosophy? People have a narrow idea of what philosophy means. There's academics who sit in their ivory towers and their philosophy ideas have nothing to do with real life and they don't make any sense. But philosophy is from the Greek words phil, meaning love, and sophia, meaning wisdom. It is the field for understanding how to think and how to live your life. If you value things like reason or figuring out what's true or critical thinking, then those are the kinds of things that philosophy deals with. And a lot of philosophers are bad, and if you read them you might get discouraged, but there are good ones as well. You don't have to give up on the entire field. And you use philosophy ideas in your life all the time, whether you realize it or not. You frequently hear about some sort of idea, and you think about it, and you evaluate if you think it's good or bad, and if you agree with it or you disagree with it. And when you do that, you are using your philosophy skills. They just aren't necessarily very studied or carefully thought out. They might still be decent, but they could probably be better if you learned from the best. Some people don't like moral philosophy very much because they associate morality with religions telling them what to do. And they're used to duty moralities, which say morality gives you all these duties that you have to do. And what's in it for you? It's just this burden on you. But good moral philosophy in the tradition of the ancient Greeks is about how to have a good, happy life on earth. So how do you be effective? How do you make good decisions? How do you be a good person? How do you make your life better? So that's all useful stuff. So I made a list because I've read a lot of books. Way, way more books than are on the list. You might think the list is like an overwhelmingly large amount of reading, but I've read far more than that. So it's a select group of the best books. So I can save you a lot of time because I read so many books, and I can tell you where to start. I'm not the only person who's done that, but I have good judgment. If you respect some of my writing, then you should try out my judgment about what books are good. And there's a lot of bad books out there. A lot of people, they try books, they give up. So it's useful to have a resource telling you which are the good ones. And you can then judge for yourself. Don't just take my word for it, but try the books, see what you think. This resource is for people who want it, I'm not a teacher, this isn't a syllabus, it's not a curriculum, you don't have to do it, no one's making you. But if you're interested in learning, then it could be useful. And one of the original reasons I made it is Karl Popper is not the best author to read cover to cover. It's better if you pick and choose which chapters to read, but people don't know which ones to read, so they just read the book straight through. And a lot of people read the wrong books from him. They read Logic of Scientific Discovery, which isn't even on my list. So I wanted to specify, what are the best chapters? Or if an author is great, which of his books are the best? And give some brief summaries. That way people don't start with, an author's third best writing. You want to start with their best writing that's the most valuable and you're most likely to learn from. And then if you finish that, then you can move on to their other writing if you liked it. But you don't want to start with one of their less good writing and then not like it and then give up and never try their best stuff. So You might have doubts that I know what I'm talking about. Are these really actually good authors? So my suggestion is that you read until you find one bad part. You can last that long. If they're actually bad, you should be able to find something bad within the first 10 or 20 pages. It's not going to be like a huge burden. But if you don't find anything bad in the first 10 or 20 pages, then hey, it's pretty good. At least that part was pretty good. You can keep reading. So don't just dismiss it out of hand. Don't give up without trying it at all. Just get started a little bit. At least try that much, is what I recommend. If you do think it's bad, if you run into parts you think are bad, then please don't just immediately give up and say, oh, it's bad. I'm smarter than Ayn Rand. I read her book. I saw where she got her arguments wrong. And that's that. Now, you might be right, but you shouldn't be completely confident that you're right. So what you want to do is write down your criticism of why this book is bad. What's wrong with it? Where's the argument go wrong? Why doesn't it have value? This doesn't have to be very long. It doesn't have to be a giant essay. It doesn't have to be a big project. But write something down, express yourself. Think through what your actual reasoning is. This isn't just to share it, but writing it down will help you think about what you mean more clearly. And if you find it difficult to write down why it's bad, that's a sign that you don't actually understand your objections very well. So once you write it down, you can share it, and then you can go to people who think the author is awesome and see if they can point out something you're missing. You may have misunderstood what the author meant, which is common. That doesn't mean you're dumb or something. Misunderstandings are very easy to occur. You should expect them to happen fairly often. And it's important to talk about what the books mean with other people to help clear up misunderstandings. Because you're going to understand some parts that they misunderstood, and they're going to understand some parts that you misunderstood, so you can help each other. And additionally, there might be counter-arguments. You might think that you saw something wrong with the book, but you could be wrong. So you want to give the chance to find out if anyone knows any counter-arguments to what you're saying. So if you can come up with something that's wrong with the book and you think it's bad, and then people can't tell you what you're misunderstanding or why your arguments are wrong, then you can say, okay, Eliot's wrong, this book isn't very good, and you can give up on it. But you should do that much if you want to be a rational person who investigates things for themselves, instead of just doing a shoddy job and not really being willing to investigate it. Also, I want to point out, all of the authors I list, except for one, have a lot of fans, besides me. So, it's not like I'm just telling you to read this weird, obscure stuff that no one likes. These are books that a lot of people think are good. That doesn't mean they actually are good, but it helps indicate that it's worth a try. If a lot of people think a book is good, that's a good sign that the book is worth taking a look at. And what I don't recommend, don't do this, is reading books about the books. Don't read a book about a book. Just read the actual book. Don't read books about Ayn Rand or about Karl Popper. Just read actual Ayn Rand and Karl Popper. A lot of secondary source books are wrong, and the reason is that the person writing the biography or the summary or whatever isn't as good as the great thinker themselves. They don't understand the ideas as well. They're not on the same level as Ayn Rand or Karl Popper. So it's better to read like the best thinkers, not summaries from someone who's a much lesser thinker. So don't rely on hearsay, reviews, reputations. You can use those for some indications of things to try, but you don't want to get caught up in whatever your peer group thinks, then you think it too. So if all your peer group says Ayn Rand is stupid, then you just assume Ayn Rand is stupid and never try reading any. If you do that, you can spend your whole life stuck only being familiar with one point of view, and you never learn about other points of view. and then you never get to judge and think for yourself about which one you actually think is the best. So a lot of people say they're too busy to read much. And a lot of them could read audiobooks, or if there isn't an audiobook, you can use text-to-speech, such as Voice Stream Reader for iOS. And you can listen to books while you're driving, while you're working out, while you're walking somewhere, while you're waiting for something, while you're eating. You can listen in a lot of situations. You can even listen to audiobooks while playing video games. A lot of video games are a bit casual and relaxed and have some repetitive parts, like you're farming gold. And while you're doing that, you could absolutely listen to an audiobook. And then you got two things done at the same time. So there's a lot of time in your life where you could probably fit in some reading, even if you're doing something else. But also, you should find some time in your life for self-improvement. You should find some time in your life to try to learn things and be a better person. That is worth doing. Don't be completely busy and just never have time to read or think or learn. And if you do start learning, it'll help you be more efficient. So you can learn to be faster at doing things, make better decisions, make fewer mistakes that you have to fix later. So it actually saves you time in the long run. Like, the smarter you get, the better at doing things you get, that'll save you time. So if you can find some time to improve yourself now, then you'll have even more time available later to improve yourself even more and do whatever else you want to do. So the sooner you can work on self-improvement, the better off you are. So how to learn from books is an important issue, because a lot of what people do is they read a book cover to cover by themselves, and then they get to the end, and their life isn't way better. And they're mystified. They're like, oh, I guess books don't work. I read it, I tried it, and nothing great happened. So what you want to do is think about the book as you're going along. Come up with questions and comments as you go along. Take notes as you go along. Don't wait till the end. Don't go through the book without much thinking, without coming up with questions, without having any comments, and then think you're going to figure out all your comments at the end. Don't try to separate like reading and thinking. Like, I'll read it now and I'll think about it later. That's not going to work. If you're not thinking while you read, you're not going to be able to remember everything and then think it over later very well. You're going to lose most of the details once you get past them. So you need to think them through at the time. So go slowly, take your time, reread things. Make sure that you understand stuff pretty well before going on. Don't be careless, don't have low standards. And talk to other people. You're going to misunderstand things. You're going to not understand why some argument works. You're going to misunderstand what an author means. That's going to happen frequently. You need to expect that and plan for it. And that means talking to other people. Because some people know things you don't. And even if you talk to someone who's dumber than you, they don't actually have to be smarter than you to be helpful. Even if they're dumber than you, like, they will still understand some parts that you got wrong. If you understand 500 things and they understand 100 things about a book, there's still probably 30 things on their list that you missed. So now I'm going to talk about each of the authors on my list. So the first one is Ayn Rand. She wrote novels and reasonably short essays. She's one of the easier people to read. She's a really good writer. And she's also the best philosopher we've ever had. Her philosophy is called Objectivism, and it values happiness on earth. It rejects superstition, religion, mysticism, denying the real world exists, anything like that. Ayn Rand advocates having and pursuing values in terms of your own self-interest to make your own life better. However, that doesn't mean anyone else gets screwed over, because there are no conflicts of interest in the long term among rational men. Everyone can have a great life, and that's all compatible. There don't have to be winners and losers. Everyone can be winners. And isn't that a wonderful thing? Isn't that something worth learning about? You don't have to sacrifice for other people. You don't have to hurt other people. Ayn Rand is a liberal in the real sense of the word. Liberal means in favor of things like freedom, tolerance, capitalism, which means free trade, individualism, and a government which protects your rights, including property rights. The proper purpose of the government is to protect citizens from force, protect people from criminals and invading armies, not to run their lives for them. Ayn Rand is an advocate of reason. She's roughly in the tradition of Aristotle, and she thinks there's a real world and we can know about it, and she does better than other thinkers, except, as we'll talk about later, Karl Popper, who made a huge breakthrough and is totally different than everyone else. So it's like there's all the regular thinkers about reason, and then there's Ayn Rand, who's way better, and then there's Karl Popper, who had a big insight that sets him apart even more. These are the Objectivist Virtues. These are a list of the 7 virtues that Ayn Rand advocated: rationality, honesty, integrity, productivity, independence, pride, and justice. I copy-pasted these from the wiki. There's a link in the description. So these will give you a little bit of a sense of what objectivism is about. So, for example, it says you should be independent. So don't let other people do your thinking for you. Don't just believe their opinions. Don't refuse to think for yourself. Have your own judgment. And be productive. Work to pursue and create values in the world. Don't just sit on your ass. And you should be able to enjoy producing things. Being a creator is a great thing. Pride is important too. A lot of people accuse objectivists of being arrogant because some of them think that they're good. And they think, hey, I put work into my life, I did pretty good, and they're proud of it. And you should have a life that you're proud of. If you're not proud of your life, something's going wrong and you really ought to make some changes. The next author on the reading list is David Deutsch. So, he is a Popperian, and he is a better writer than Karl Popper, and he made a few refinements to Karl Popper's philosophy. So, I suggest reading David Deutsch before Karl Popper. That doesn't mean Deutsch is better, it just means that he's better as an introduction. He's a bit easier to read, he's a bit more modern. David is the founder of Taking Children Seriously, which is an educational philosophy which advocates non-coercive parenting, and which is implied by Karl Popper's philosophy of how learning works, how knowledge is created, etc. David Deutsch is still alive, by the way. Most of the authors I recommend are dead, unfortunately. But I actually had thousands of hours of discussions with David Deutsch. His first book, The Fabric of Reality, integrates 4 big themes, which are physics, epistemology, computation, and evolution. David is a physicist in addition to a philosopher, and epistemology means the theory of knowledge. So that's things like how learning works, and how you create great ideas and new scientific theories. And the underlying way that epistemology works is actually by evolution, which is why those are related. And he also talks about how physics and computation are related. His books are really interesting if you're interested in science, because he connects science and philosophy, and he talks about a wide variety of topics, such as artificial intelligence and memes. His second book, The Beginning of Infinity, talks about making infinite, unbounded progress. That includes progress for technology, but it also includes moral progress and making society better, improving our government, improving our laws, and improving how we think. It's all kinds of progress, not just a limited view of progress. And if that kind of thing appeals to you, if you're interested in progress, then the book will help you see how it's possible in the big picture and help you get started in improving your own life. Karl Popper is best known as a philosopher of science. He also wrote some other stuff, but his philosophy of science is the most important and best work that he did. Like everyone I recommend, he's an advocate of reason, and he believes there's a real world and we can learn about it. Humans aren't helpless or powerless. We're not stuck in a mystifying universe that's too confusing for us to understand what's going on. We can make progress. We can have science that works. We can think rationally, etc. And Karl Popper explains that the way people learn, the way to create good ideas, is by guesses and criticism. And this is literally the process of evolution, the same as how animals evolved. Because animals have knowledge in them. Things like the design of an eye has knowledge in it. You know, an animal's eye isn't a random design. It's a good design. And so there's the same issue there as having good ideas as opposed to random ideas. The way evolution works is there are replicators of some sort, and there's variation and selection. And that is how genes evolved, and it's also how ideas evolve to get better ideas. Popper is a very tolerant philosopher who knows that it's easy to make mistakes. He's a fallibilist in the sense that he knows it's always possible to make a mistake, but he also understands that mistakes are common, and we always need to be looking out for mistakes, and we shouldn't expect to be perfect. Not being perfect isn't a bad thing, though. It means there's always more to improve. So a mistake is anything that can be improved. Like, people think of mistakes as like these horrible, awful things, but anywhere there's room for improvement is the same sort of fundamental issue as a mistake. It's something you want to be better. Whether it's just bad or there's an opportunity to be even better, either way, it could be improved. There could be learning and progress there. So Popper recommends putting a lot of thought into the possibility that you're mistaken. So you need to look for ways you're mistaken, and you need to talk about your ideas with other people to get criticism. So you need to be self-critical, and you also need to consider criticism from others. And that is how you can improve your guesses and turn them into good ideas. And Popper combines this attitude that we can make mistakes and we can be mistaken with also there is an objective truth. It's not just arbitrary subjective opinions that aren't very good. It's there is a truth of the matter, there's an objective world out there, with facts of reality. And we can make progress towards that truth. The whole concept of a mistake relies on there being a truth. A mistake has to be something that's different than the truth. So there has to be a truth. And being able to understand at the same time that mistakes are common, we're fallible, but also there is a truth and we can learn about it and work towards it is an important combination. Popper is also well known for refuting induction and justificationism, which are bad philosophy of science ideas that and about knowledge in general, which are believed by virtually everyone. Ludwig von Mises is an economist, and he's a liberal in the proper sense of the word, so he's in favor of things like liberty and peace and cooperation. He wants people to work together to produce more, and economics helps people understand how to do that. And capitalism helps people do that. Capitalism is a social system, which Mises points out. First of all, mass production helps the masses. Mass production means making lots and lots of stuff for the bulk of people. It's not oriented for the rich. It makes good things affordable and available to the bulk of the population when you can mass produce stuff. And trade in general helps everyone. He also talks about, for example, how if you have good trade relations between countries, they rarely go to war. Because if they go to war, it will disrupt trade, which will lower their standard of living. And people don't like to have a lower standard of living. So it makes war more costly and gives people more reason to avoid it if they're having trade. Mises is most famous maybe for his argument against socialism, which is that you need a price system in order to make rational decisions. You can't calculate which materials you should build a product out of unless those materials have prices, so you know which one there is more extra available of, which one is less dearly needed for other projects. Having a basic understanding of economics is really useful to being able to look at the world. It's like having a basic understanding of science. It opens up a new perspective on things for you. It lets you see the world in a different way. That's an advanced, sophisticated way. And it gives you a bunch of tools for analyzing the world. Scientists have tools like experimental tests and watching out for sources of error and having repeatable experiments. Economists have tools like understanding sunk costs and incentives and being able to rationally analyze human action and decision making. William Godwin is one of the few philosophers I recommend who is more than 100 years old. In general, with older philosophers, either they weren't that good or someone else has understood their ideas and written a newer, better version of it. So even the old philosophers who I think were pretty good at the time, I usually don't recommend reading them. So, for example, John Locke had some good ideas. However, you can get better versions of his ideas from Ayn Rand and Ludwig von Mises, so it's not necessary to read Locke. So William Godwin is one of the exceptions. This is partly because he's obscure. This is the one guy on my list who doesn't have very much of a fan base or following. So there haven't been a lot of people trying to improve his ideas and write better versions of them. But it's also because most thinkers, even if they're really good, maybe they're 50 years ahead of their time. They're in advance of their contemporaries, but later on people surpass them. Whereas Godwin was over 200 years ahead of his time. He's just really amazing at how good a thinker he was compared to the time period. He was just so good that he's still good today. So, one of his ideas is that truth and reason can always beat error. We're not doomed to have bad ideas rule the world. Good ideas can win out, which is a common theme of the Enlightenment. And Godwin was a philosopher towards the end of the Enlightenment. And he explained this in a particularly good way. He also talks about persuasion versus force, and he understands this better than others. So, people often try to give an argument for something, and then if someone doesn't listen or they reject the argument, then the person gets tempted to escalate. They say, oh, he's not listening, he's rejecting this great idea, so I better force him. I better pressure him. But that doesn't make any sense. If your argument wasn't good enough to persuade someone, you should be extra concerned about it. You should be extra skeptical. You should be extra worried that maybe you're wrong. And you should be going back and improving your idea. So, stick to persuasion, don't use force. If you can't persuade someone, improve your ideas. And part of the reason this attitude works is that there is an objective truth that's best for everyone. So, if you have a good idea, there is a way to explain it so other people will also agree with it. Because there isn't a separate truth for them, and there isn't a separate interest where they don't want to accept it, they have a bias against it. The truth, if you understand it well enough, and it's sophisticated enough, and you figure everything out clearly enough, is just good for everyone. Godwin was also big on unbounded progress, and the possibility of just making things better and better. And he is the only person that I'm aware of to ever have good ideas about children and education before David Deutsch in the 1990s. Godwin took liberal ideas and he was actually willing to apply them to children, as opposed to, for example, John Locke, who said, this is similar to an exact quote, but I'm talking from memory, said, liberty can do no good for children. That's John Locke. Godwin actually treated children like people and took a rational philosophy of reason and how learning works and so on and applied that to education. Whereas everyone else, basically, no matter what they think about how reason works and how people should be treated in general, with tolerance and cooperation and so on, they just make an exception for children. And they think children need to be bullied and that parents need to be authorities. See, Godwin, there are quite a few thinkers, including Godwin, who question authority, and they have some issues with authority. They don't want the government to be the ultimate authority. They want people to have freedom instead of being controlled by authority. They want to limit authority a lot in general. And they want people to think for themselves instead of believing what an authority tells them. However, they then make an exception for children, and they think teachers and parents should be authorities. But Godwin doesn't do that. Godwin also wrote about government abuses, for example, the criminal justice system. One of his good ideas was that punishment for crime is bad. So self-defense is good. And that can include locking people up in prison if they're dangerous. So it's perfectly reasonable to have a criminal justice system, have courts, have laws, etc. But you should never do something just for the purpose of punishing someone. It should only be for the purpose of defense. If you need to lock someone up to keep society safe, that's okay. But don't lock them up if there's no danger, just to hurt them. That's cruel. And there's nothing rational about doing that. There's no cause to do it. Edmund Burke is the other old philosopher. He's one of the hardest ones to understand on the list because he's both old and also he is a politician. Everyone else tries to tell you, this is my idea, this is why it's a good idea, this is how it works. But Burke was trying to argue his case in political life. So if you want to understand his philosophy, his underlying thinking, you have to read between the lines a little bit. However, that's worthwhile because he is a great thinker who had some really valuable ideas. So Burke understood the value of existing knowledge, which we might call tradition. He understood that we have a civilization and we've worked on it for hundreds of years. We've built it up and we've made improvements. And you need to be careful changing it. That doesn't mean he's against change. It just means he wants to do change in rational ways. That means looking for reforms. And in general, it means looking for small reforms because the smaller reform you can make, the less chance of breaking something. That doesn't mean going slow, though. You can do a lot of small steps. If you find small steps and they work, you can just do one after another and keep going. Smaller steps actually end up being faster than big steps because you screw up less. So you have to fix the fallout of your mistakes less often. So it actually saves time to do things in a rational way. What you don't want to do is have a revolution where you just throw out the, quote, cobwebs of society, throw out like all the existing ideas and start over. People are tempted to have revolutions because they see lots of problems with the world, and they're right about many of the problems. And Burke was aware of many of the problems too. They see things that are wrong with society. They see things wrong with the government, and they want a better world. They want things to be nicer. They want a utopia, perhaps. And so far, that's okay. However, if you just start over, you're not going to make things better. If you start over, you're going to make your own mistakes. If you wipe the slate clean, and then you create a new society, it will have its own mistakes. And you're just going to have to start the process over of making progress for hundreds of years and refining things and improving things. So if you start over, you're just going backwards. If you want to make things better, you have to find ways to reform the current society. There's no way to just start over and then not make mistakes. That's extreme arrogism. That's super arrogant to think that you can just do everything perfect. Life doesn't work that way. Mistakes are inevitable, but they can be dealt with. But you can't deal with them by just, I'm going to start over and not make mistakes. That doesn't work. You have to work through them. And that's what the French Revolution didn't do. They thought, we have such great ideas, we're so rational, we'll just have a utopia by having our great ideas, rather than reforming the existing society. So that they didn't value what they had, and they just wanted to start over and thought they would do way better, but they did way worse. Another problem with starting over is the things you know that are wrong with society, there are actually some good things about them. So, one, you know that they're not so bad that they ruin the world. You know, their society can still exist even though those flaws exist. They're compatible with civilization. The French Revolution, on the other hand, made mistakes so large that they were actually incompatible with civilization, and they led to mass killings and mass destruction. And also, if you know what the problems with your society are, that puts you in a better situation to work around them and cope with them. Whereas if you build a new society from scratch, you're going to have a bunch of unknown problems. You're going to have all these problems that you're not familiar with. You don't know how to cope with them. You don't know what they are. So they're actually going to do more damage. Burke also saved the world twice. This is not as well known as it should be. People know that he opposed the French Revolution, but they don't realize that the French Revolution was very dangerous, and it needed to be opposed, and Burke was the best and most important voice opposing it. And he provided early warning so that people could get prepared for the danger and be ready to deal with it. If the good parts of the world had waited 20 extra years to start responding to the threat, things could have gone a lot worse. E.g., Napoleon might have conquered Europe. And the other one, which people just don't know about, is that Burke is responsible for peace between Britain and America after the War of Independence. People think something like, after Cornwallis was defeated, the British lost the war, and therefore there was peace. And that's not accurate at all. That just forced the British to retreat. But the king and a lot of other British people were not planning to have peace with America. They were planning to basically try again later and be hostile. But Burke wanted a peace treaty with America. He wanted to actually solve the problem and have good relations with America. He had also supported the American Revolution, by the way, because basically the British were being too unreasonable, and he pleaded with people to be more reasonable and treat America better. So he sympathized with the colonists. Anyway, Burke had such balls that he stood up to the king. And it's hard to understand what that means today, especially if you're American. Like, we don't have a king. We've never had a king. But standing up to a king, like, over 200 years ago was an amazingly courageous and important thing that Burke did. And he not only did that, but he got his way. He got peace with America. And, that changed the course of history. Thomas Szasz writes about psychiatry, primarily. There is information about liberalism and a little bit about science and other things, but his focus is on psychiatry. So he wrote a book called The Myth of Mental Illness, which talks about how, quote, mental illnesses are not real diseases. They're not a medical problem. They are stigmatizing labels for people's ideas, behaviors, and communications. The purpose of psychiatry is social control. Psychiatry is like the modern face of the Inquisition. It persecutes heretics and deviants and unwanted people who don't fit into society. Psychiatry also bypasses the legal system. There's the insanity defense, which excuses crimes. And also, people can be imprisoned in mental hospitals without a trial. So you can be locked up without a trial, and that's actually really scary. And it's a lot more common than people realize. Involuntary commitment is absolutely a thing that happens to millions of people. And sometimes it's short. There's the involuntary 3-day holds. And being locked up for 3 days is a pretty big deal. But sometimes it's long, and people spend, years and years locked up with absolutely no trial. And that's really bad that the legal system can be bypassed. Psychiatry makes excuses for policies that people can't openly advocate. So being intolerant and then using force against people you don't like is not acceptable in our society. However, psychiatry, but people still want to do it sometimes. They're not supposed to, but they still are interested in it. So they don't admit it. Instead, what they do is they get psychiatrists who make excuses and say, oh, it's medical science, so actually this is legitimate. And then they can do the dirty work for people. So Szasz explains that people do have problems. Like a quote, depressed person, they really do have problems in their life. There's things going wrong. But they don't need to be drugged and bullied into submission. They don't need electroshock. They don't need a lobotomy. They need good ideas, common sense, philosophy, problem-solving skills, resources in their life, like money and a home. Szasz is easy to read. He's a modern writer. He died a couple of years ago. He was a great person, by the way. I had discussions with him, and he was very rational, very receptive to criticism. So Szasz writes relatively short books. He wrote a lot of books that are around 200 pages. And they're pretty easy reading. And you can learn in detail about a sophisticated, intelligent topic. You can learn what it's like to understand something really well. And it's an important topic that affects millions of people just in America. Like, people don't realize how widespread psychiatry and psychology are and how many lives they affect. But it's really common. It's a big deal. It's a big issue in our society. So there's multiple reasons to read this. It's very, very high quality knowledge. It's easy to read, so it'll help you get started if you're having trouble with some of the more difficult books. And it's a big current issue. And Szasz is a very rational, good thinker. He read Popper, he read Rand, he read Mises, and he was using ideas from the other people on the list in his own writing. So you can see him as applying some of the other writers' work. After the main 6 authors that I've just gone through, I have 2 more authors in a politics section, which are Ann Coulter and David Horowitz. They're current authors who are writing about current US politics. And I included them because a lot of people want to read about politics, and if you're going to do that, I might as well tell you who I think is good to read, instead of just you read whoever. However, I don't especially recommend reading about politics. Politics is not the most important thing. Being good at thinking is more important than finding out about the latest dumb thing the president did, or the latest crap Congress is doing, or whatever. If you get involved in politics, you're not going to change the world much. It's very hard to make much difference in politics. And even if you're effective, it's not the biggest effect you could have. If you want to change the world, you need to teach people to be better thinkers so that they can actually analyze politics themselves and get it right. If people could think better and understand arguments better and make better judgments, then they would vote better and they would prefer politicians who make better statements that are more intelligent and make more sense. So rather than just going around and telling people, vote for this guy and support this political position, it's better to help people learn how to think better and how to analyze ideas better. It's the issue of teaching a man to fish versus giving him a fish. Trying to tell him that this is a good political policy that they should support is just giving them one fish, whereas helping them learn how to think is teaching them to fish. And I would also say, start with yourself. Get your own life together. become a great person, become a great thinker yourself. That's where you should start. And if you can do that, then you'll be able to help other people think better and get their own lives together more. A lot of people go into politics and they don't actually really know which side to be on. They're not good enough thinkers to judge which political side is actually better. You really need to know what you're talking about before you take sides, and then put a bunch of work into supporting one side. You're much better off learning how to think and learning political philosophy so you can decide, are the Democrats or the Republicans better, rather than just, pick the one that's popular in the town you grew up in and then work for them and then never actually learn much about ideas. And even better than trying to teach people to think about politics better is to do philosophical education. Teach them, about reason itself. Reason is the most important thing. And the best way to help the world be more rational is, 1, talking about how reason works, and 2, dealing with parenting and the schools. Because how kids are brought up is a massive factor in how rational they are, how good at thinking they are, and how their lives go. And if you think politics is bad and that politicians suck and the government sucks and it's all a mess and blah blah blah, if you think that sucks, parenting and schools are much worse. There's much bigger problems there. It's even more of a mess, and it has a lot fewer people trying to improve it. So at the end, I have an other topics section. The main list is organized in terms of these are the best thinkers. The best thinkers generally write about the most important topics, mostly. But I care a lot more about what is the quality of the ideas in this book, how good are the arguments, how rational is the thinking, rather than what topic they write about. So the main authors are basically the best thinkers. And then, non-coincidentally, the best thinkers wrote about very important topics and wrote very good books. And so at the end, I wanted to include some other good books from people who aren't quite as good thinkers, but are still really, really good. And they wrote, a few great books. So some people wrote just an individual book that's particularly important. Possibly it's just on a single topic. Like, I included Feynman's lectures on physics. Now, that's not something everyone needs to read. Everyone should read Ayn Rand and Karl Popper. If you don't know about reason and morality, you're at a huge disadvantage in your whole life. But you don't need to read Feynman's lectures on physics. It's just included if you're interested in physics. Here's a great book to read. So the most notable authors in the final section are Feynman, Reisman, and Peikoff. Reisman was a student of Ayn Rand and Ludwig von Mises, and he wrote one really, really good book called Capitalism, A Treatise on Economics. And that book is on par with Mises. It's a similar quality level. So I super recommend him, but he just has the one great book rather than a bunch of works, unfortunately. Richard Feynman is a physicist, and people don't treat him very seriously as a thinker. He has some books with fun stories, and then he has books teaching you about physics and computation and other cool stuff. But they see him as a scientist. But he's actually a really good thinker. He understood Popper well. He read a lot. He was just really, 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 really smart. And so he was able to look at topics like philosophy and whatever else and have good ideas. People are a little confused because he insulted philosophers. He said he didn't like most philosophers very much, and didn't really respect them very much. But, he was right about that. Most of them are bad. And he's not the only person to say that. Ayn Rand and Karl Popper, at the top of my list as the greatest philosophers, also did not like most philosophers very much and had a low opinion of most of them. Feynman has some fun books that are really easy to read, and they have good ideas in them. It just gives you a nice perspective on the world. You learn little bits and pieces. But he doesn't write anything like an organized philosophy book like the other main authors. And Leonard Peikoff is the #1 student of Ayn Rand. He wrote an actual treatise on objectivism, and he was a lecturer who gave a bunch of courses, and you can buy audio recordings of them on his website. And he's not as good as Ayn Rand, but he has good material. It's a bit mixed. It's not all, some is better than others, but there's definite value there. So basically, if you finish Ayn Rand, then you should take an interest in Peikoff if you want more. And also, I included specifically his book, Understanding Objectivism, which, if you're having any trouble with Ayn Rand, or you've read most of her books, that one in particular is really helpful. It helps you understand objectivism better. So it helps you with the learning process. So it's the one book from him that I'd particularly recommend you consider before you've read all of Ayn Rand. You might want to read that one earlier on. So, learning a lot can be hard. Don't feel bad if you have some problems. Getting stuck is normal. Misunderstanding things is normal. What you should do is get help. Don't try to go it alone. There are a lot of resources available that can help you. So the reading list itself is just one resource I made, but I have a lot more. And other people have resources too. So one of the best resources is I have a discussion group where you can ask questions. So I have an email group, and there's also, you can just post questions and blog comments. And people will reply. You can post in old blog threads, and people reply. People read my blog comments. You can also email me. You can also hire me. I do philosophy consulting. I can help you in a personalized way. And the links to all these resources are in the YouTube description. So you can find all this stuff. I have websites. I've written a lot, and you can search it for specific topics you're having trouble with. There's also discussion archives, and you can search the archives by topic. You can type in search terms and find old discussions. A lot of questions have been asked and answered before. And also, specifically for the reading list, I made podcasts in addition to this one. I did one with Alan and one with Justin. Those are other philosophers who know a lot about these books. They're about 3 hours long each. So there's a lot of discussion there. We talk about a lot of stuff. There's lots of info there. And that can help you get started with the reading list. And those are for sale at my digital download store. And the links are in the description. So good luck. That's the end. And I hope you will take an interest in learning and read some books.